Here we go. Okay. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining me. This is an unusual class because, as you know, we discussed in the WhatsApp group that I didn't have time to prepare this week's parsha because we just got home a few hours ago from a little vacation with my husband. But since this week's parsha is it contains in it the message about um, choosing between blessing and curse, I thought that it was fitting for me to tell you my Torah story. Now, I know you guys know that this is where this is going. Hang on, I have to turn the fan on in here. Give me 1 second. Okay. So I took some notes, and I'm hoping to go through this chronologically, and then I don't know how long it's going to take. I've never done this before. I've told pieces of my story, but I've never told the whole story. So, so I'm going to do that now, starting from when I was 4.5. But I guess really I should start from when I was born because I was born Jewish. Um, Last summer, my sister and I took DNA tests. You know that ancestry.com. It was listen, it was
Yes.
Prime Day and the and the tests were like, 60% off or something. So we both did it. And I was looking for something exotic, in my background, and my background came back 100% Ashkenazi Jewish, which means that as far as I can tell, that there was never anything else but Jewish in my family line. And so I knew that I was born Jewish, but I was not given a Torah education as a child. I didn't know what it meant. But I do my earliest Jewish memory was when I was 4.5. When I was 4.5, my younger brother was born, and he had a Brit Milah, a ritual circumcision, and it was in our house. And I remember that one of my father's sisters, my aunt, she fainted at this bris. So it was kind of dramatic. I do remember that. But that was like the most distinctly Jewish memory of my whole childhood. I didn't really have any idea what it meant that I was Jewish. Now, in those days, it's much less true now, but in those days, boys were given a Jewish education and girls were not. So I have an older sister and a younger brother. So my brother, when he became of age, he was sent to Hebrew school, which is um, after we all went to public school, but after public school, he went 3 days a week or whatever it was to the synagogue and he studied whatever it is he studied. I don't know because I wasn't invited to go. When I was growing up at this stage of my life, we lived in New York, and we lived in a neighborhood where almost everybody was either Jewish or Catholic. All of the Catholic kids went to something called catechism, which I'm not exactly sure what that is, but that's where like they learned the precepts of Catholicism. And the and my brother went to Hebrew school. The Some of the Jewish kids went to Hebrew school. I did not. I did not get to go. So when he was 13, my brother had a bar mitzvah, which I didn't really understand what that meant. One of the other very vague Jewish memories I have as a child is that I remember my mother, it was one year on Hanukkah, and we had one of those electric menorahs, and they have orange bulbs. I think they're still sold around. I'm not sure. I remember that my mother, who came from not a religious home, took a square of paper towel, put it on her head. She made the blessing in English. I only remember this one night, although, I was young, so it for sure could have happened much more often. And I remember her making the blessing in English, Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, blah, 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 blah. And then she would turn the little bulbs to light up whatever night it was. Um, there is one precious, precious picture of me at a Passover Seder at my maternal grandparents' house. And I want to see if I put this, I was going to send it to you, but then I thought, let me see if I can share it with you while we're online together. That's hmm, no screens. Okay, I don't see it as an option. I'll send it to you later. We are in the tiny kitchen of my grandmother's apartment in the Bronx in New York. This is the apartment that my mother grew up in. My mother's only child. It was a one-bedroom apartment. She used to sleep in the living room, and my grandparents were still living there. I was 6 years old. My father is holding a Maxwell House Haggadah, which I don't even know if it's still in print, but it was the classic Haggadah. In the picture, you see my father, who at the time was about 30 years old, my brother, and me. And there's another picture which I seem to have misplaced that my mother and my older sister were sitting at um, across from us at this little square table. That was, I don't have any recollection of that, by the way. The only reason I know that we did this is because there was photographic evidence and because somebody took a picture on Passover, which is, of course, a Jewish holiday, when today I would never think to use a camera. That gives you some idea of where my family was. I remember one year I was a few years older. I walked to synagogue with my father on Yom Kippur. I knew it was a fast day, but I was young. Maybe I was 11, 12, something like that. I know that I didn't sit in the services. I was assigned to babysit the little kids. And I remember knowing vaguely that it was a fast day and feeling guilty because I kept sneaking water from the water fountain in synagogue, even though I had no idea what this fast was about. Now, in high school, I think I might have told you guys this piece of the story. I somehow found myself hanging out with a group of Southern Baptists. They were they were nice kids. They were, clean living and all that. They used to have ice cream socials. I remember that being like a big thing. And they had some kind of Bible study, but then they were told, "Oh, teenagers are not allowed to do Bible study without an adult," whatever. I thought that was stupid. So, um I I ended up leaving that group, but I do remember this one experience that they took me to church. Now, I don't know if they were missionizing. I I don't have any recollection of that. I thought it was just that they were like sharing their experiences with me because I'm pretty ignorant about anything that has to do with religion at this point. But there was something going on at that church that I now know is called an altar call. And it was very dramatic and very compelling. And I remember in my head, I'm standing in the pews and I'm thinking to myself, and I remember this so clearly, it's high school now, don't go up. This isn't for you. You're a Jew. When I look back on it, that moment, that insight, which Hashem clearly altered the course of my life because I did not go up. I did not become a Christian. I wasn't like inclined to do it. It's just if you've ever been in a situation like that, what I remember is it was so compelling and so dramatic and so attractive. And I had this kind of spiritual void. Um, and so, but anyway, I did not go up, even though I had zero Jewish education until I was in my 20s. So um, let's fast forward to 1979. I have left South Florida, where I went to high school, and I went to Maryland, to the University of Maryland, and I met a young man at college. I was actually rooming with someone he had gone to high school with, and she was not Jewish, but he was, and he asked me out, and we dated for 2.5 years. And now neither of us knew very much about living as Jews, but his family had belonged to a Reform congregation. If you're not familiar with this, Reform is um, among the most liberal versions of Judaism that exist in the US. Um, and so I remember going once, definitely once, because of the story I'm going to tell you definitely happened on Yom Kippur. Maybe I went twice, I don't remember, but I remember thinking as I'm listening or I'm reading the prayer service in English, I'm a little embarrassed today to tell you this, but what I thought was, what kind of a God would need to be constantly praised like this? That was the thought that I had when I was oh so young. And so I left early. I learned nothing. My boyfriend was fasting, and I remember that night I went after the services were over. I went to the convenience store and I bought something to eat. I literally understood nothing about what this was. It all seemed silly to me. I just want to say, of course, now speaking as somebody who is much more spiritually evolved than I was in 1979, I understand that all of that, the praises of God is not for God, but it's for us. It's to remind us of the greatness of God. But I didn't understand it at the time. I ended up marrying this young man in a reform ceremony in a reform synagogue where one of the halls was named for his grandparents. But there was nothing Jewish about our lives. I remember one time we did have some kind of Passover Seder at his parents' house, and his mother. So there's one of the symbols on the Seder table is a zeroa, which is a bone that is supposed to represent the Passover sacrifice. And his just this will give you an idea of where I come from. His mother put a milk bone dog biscuit on the Seder table because it it was, it was the shape of a bone, sort of. Um, that's like what I come from. Okay. The marriage did not last. It lasted 16 months. And when it ended, I needed to move out because we were living in an apartment that his parents owned, and I bought a copy of a paper that barely exists now, but it was called the Baltimore Jewish Times. And back then, there were classified ad sections. And I didn't exactly understand why at the time, but I decided I need a place to live. If I'm going to go live with strangers, I felt like it was somehow safer for me to choose a Jewish stranger, roommate, whatever. So I started looking. And as I'm flipping through the pages of the Baltimore Jewish Times, there are articles about things obviously I did not know. Holidays I had never heard of. Because basically, if a holiday did not, like I knew Passover, I knew Hanukkah, I knew Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. That was it. But there were articles about different holidays during the year, and I had just finished graduate school. I had a master's. I just earned a master's degree, so I knew how to be a student. And in the paper, in this Baltimore Jewish Times, it was this little tiny ad for a class called Introduction to Judaism. And so I said, well, I know how to do that. I know how to go to class. So I'm going to take this class. So it was like 16 weeks, and it was taught by the Reform and Conservative rabbis in Baltimore, which is a city that I was living in at the time. And I came to find out that I was the only Jewish person in the class because the class was designed for people who were not Jewish, but who were dating Jews so that they could like learn the culture and the holidays and all that stuff. But it was perfect for me because I knew next to nothing. And I ended up joining. So you had to have a sponsoring rabbi. Now, that makes sense to me when I think about the fact that most of the class was for people who were dating a Jew. And there was probably a desire, a hope that eventually some of those people would convert. And so they had to have a relationship with a rabbi. So I found one, and he was a Reform rabbi. And he encouraged me after the class was over to enroll in an adult bat mitzvah class that was being offered. So there was me, I was in my 20s, and there were like 4 or 5 other women who were, well, in retrospect, now they weren't that old, but they seemed much older than me. They must have been like in their 50s at the time. And so every morning, before every Shabbat morning, I would drive to this Reform synagogue and I would take my adult bat mitzvah class, and then I would leave because I never stayed for the prayer service. I was interested in the knowledge. I wasn't particularly interested in applying for it. But I did eventually, oh, and during that period of time, the assistant rabbi of this congregation, with whom I am still in touch, she's a woman, and she started a Bible study class for singles. And so I went to that for a while. This is like the very beginning of any kind of formal or structured learning that I did. But at this stage, I wasn't looking to become anything. I was just curious. It was just strictly an intellectual discovery for me. And I was And at this stage, I do not even know. I am not aware that there are any Orthodox Jews left in the world. I literally thought that all the Orthodox Jews that were left in the world lived in Miami Beach, and they were all old. And when they died, that would be the end of Orthodoxy. I'm trying to help you understand how unbelievably ignorant I was back then. So in Baltimore, I don't know if it still goes on, but in the summers when I'm involved with this Reform congregation, there was an ethnic festival every weekend. So there was the Italian festival, the Polish festival, blah blah blah. And on Labor Day weekend was always the Jewish American festival. And now I had just become an adult bat mitzvah, whatever that means. It didn't mean a whole lot, but there was a booth there and there was a big sign and it said, test your Jewish IQ. Now I think I know lots of stuff because I took this introduction to Judaism class and I had this adult bat mitzvah and I got every single question wrong. There were 20 questions. I did not know any of them. So the rabbi who was staffing the booth, I didn't even understand what this was all about. Of course, now I understand that there are certain Jews whose career really is devoted to bringing Jews back to tradition. They're not looking to convert people who aren't Jewish, but to take Jews who are assimilated and teach them something. Okay. So he said, well, what we do, if you're interested, is we can set you up with a study partner. Now, I'm still in my very ignorant stage and I'm single, right? I'm divorced. I have no children. I'm single. And I assumed that the study partner that he was going to set me up with was going to be a man, because in my head, men know stuff about Judaism. And what do women know? So, um, so I thought maybe, maybe I'll meet a nice Jewish man that way. Anyway, he set me up with a woman who was, I was maybe in my late 20s at this point, maybe not even, I don't know, mid 20s. He set me up with a young woman who I assumed was going through chemotherapy, even though she was pregnant with her second child, because I could tell she was wearing a wig because she was newly married. It wasn't a very good wig. And I could tell she was wearing a wig. So I thought that the only reason I knew that somebody would wear a wig is if their hair fell out because they had chemotherapy. It turns out she did, she did not. But she was this young married Orthodox woman, and she devoted an hour or two every week. I went to her house religiously. She taught me one-on-one about the Jewish holidays, about life cycle events, she gave me on my very first mishloach manot, which is sometimes called shalach manos. I don't know what you call it. It's a gift of food that we Jews give other Jews on Purim day. And I remember it was, those cheap, it's American thing. They don't exist in Israel. Maybe they don't exist in the countries where you guys are, but they are these white paper plates that are fluted around the edges, like they're ruffled sort of around the edges. There was a bag of pretzels and a bag of jelly beans in a plastic bag with like a twist tie. That was the whole thing. They were a young couple. But look, I don't remember most of the mishloach manot that I have ever gotten in my life, but I remember this one because it was a very first one. During this period of time, I was seeing a man who was not Jewish. And I was also studying with her. And the rabbi that was in charge of this organization said to me, would you like to go away for a Shabbat experience in a hotel? And it's all free. And just, you'll meet some nice people and you'll learn some things and so forth. And it was sponsored by Aish HaTorah, which is a big outreach to Jewish organization based in Jerusalem. But they had this incredibly charismatic rabbi who taught there was workshops and prayer services and all this other stuff. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but it was free and it was an experience. And I was like into learning new things about Jewish things. Again, no plan to ever do anything with this. I went to a workshop about the Torah codes. I don't know if we've ever spoken about this together, but basically at that point, this is now the mid 80s, I want to say. Torah codes were a way of demonstrating to people like me who were intellectually inclined that God wrote the Torah. And I actually went to this seminar twice because the first time I thought, yeah, that was very nice, but like, I don't know. I don't have, I was an academic. I don't hear anybody countering it. It could be that they're just trying to brainwash me, blah, 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 whatever. So I went again. And there were two things that happened the second time that I attended. It's the same seminar, okay? One thing that happened is that while I'm sitting in this Torah codes presentation, which I had heard some months before, I had this, I came to this understanding that in fact God wrote the Torah. And if God wrote the Torah and it has instructions in there for Jewish people, and I knew that I was Jewish, then I concluded that these instructions applied to me. And so that was the last time for a very, very, very long time that I wore pants outside of the house. Now, um, and the other thing that happened on that seminar is at the end of Shabbat, there was the Havdalah ceremony, which is a ceremony that separates between the Shabbat and the rest of the week. And they lower the lights. So it's very, and we say in Hebrew, miragesh, it's very emotional. They lower the lights and they're singing and there's guitar playing and there's a candle and there's spices and all that stuff. And I remember that I started to cry, but I didn't understand why. I just something about that ceremony touched me. Many years later, this rabbi said to me, when you started crying at the Havdalah ceremony on that Shabbaton, he said, I knew I was going to get you. He knew that I was in. Um, okay, so slowly, I I kept learning. And this was about the period of time that there was a special 6-week class for adults to learn how to read Hebrew. That's when I learned how to read Hebrew. I bought a house. I was working full time and I was a doctoral student at the time. And I bought a house that I didn't even know was in a religious Jewish neighborhood. I remember the first night that I had keys to the house, I went to a non-kosher Chinese restaurant and I brought home food. And for myself, it was just me and the house. And I ate non-kosher Chinese food in that house. Over around this time, I met another Jewish man, one who had a background, but he was not observant when I met him. Because if he had been observant when I met him, he would have no interest in me because I was studying, but I wasn't really doing anything. Um, and so over time, we started keeping Shabbat and we koshered our kitchen. For me, it was the first, we made our kitchen kosher. For me, it was the first time I had ever done anything like that. For him, he had been observant previously and he kind of fell off the path. So it wasn't new for him. I remember the very first time that he made Kiddush, which is the blessing on wine on Friday night, and he was completely fluent. Like he wasn't like a new student. He hadn't done it for a number of years, but he did it like, because he had grown up with this tradition. Um, and so now I'm kind of in. I'm I'm keeping Shabbat. I'm um I'm eating kosher, although that didn't happen right away. What we started to go, we lived in this religious Jewish, he moved into the house that I bought, and we started going to other people's homes for Shabbat. And one of the, for Shabbat meals, because it was in this neighborhood where you'd walk 2 blocks this way or 3 blocks that way, whatever, you'd be at some other Jewish person's house. And there was this one particular rabbi who was very active in um, he was he was my ex-husband's childhood rabbi, and he was very welcoming, and we would go there a lot. And so now it's a few days before Passover, and on Passover in a Jewish home, after we thoroughly cleanse the house of chametz of the things that we're not supposed to eat on Passover, we have a ritual the night before that we take a candle and a feather and a wooden spoon and we go around the house looking for did we miss anything. It's a whole I'll tell you more about that. But they sell the candle and the feather and the wooden spoon in kits. And at that time, I was sent to this rabbi's house to go buy one of these kits or to pick one up. I don't remember if he charged for it. And I went right from work. Now, I had just started on Shabbat when I went to people's houses. I had just started covering my hair, but I wasn't doing it at work. And now I'm going. Also, I started using my Hebrew name in the community, and at work, I was using my English name. So I was like, I had a foot in both worlds. And I remember going to this rabbi's house, and that morning I had stashed a hat in my car so that I wouldn't have to go home. And I quickly covered my hair, and I went to his door, and I got the feather and the candle and the wooden spoon. And I remember thinking, am I in or am I out? Which is it? Around that time, I was still eating. I mean, I would have some kosher food, and I had kosher food in the house, but I was still eating non-kosher food out. Most specifically, very often at work, for lunch, I would go to Wendy's. Wendy, for those of you that are not from America, that's a fast food burger restaurant. And I knew that, so I was learning about the system of making blessings on food. There's a whole complicated system of blessing food. And I was not, I knew that and they involve using God's name. So I knew that I shouldn't say that on foods that weren't kosher, that weren't fitting as suitable for me as a Jew to eat. But I also felt at that point like I should not be putting something in my mouth without acknowledging God. And so I would make up blessings on non-kosher food. I was also very much struggling with hair covering at that time because I was horribly mistaught about what that's all about. And so now I'm in kind of, but I am crying the entire first year of my Torah life because I'm about 29, 30, 31, around that, because the messages that I was getting about women in Torah were in conflict with my affirmative sense of myself as a woman. And I couldn't reconcile them. I believed in a deep way that the Torah was true, and I wanted to follow a Torah path, but I could not reconcile it with the ways that I thought that the Torah that I was seeing in the community where I lived was unbalanced and even sexist towards women. And so I cried a lot that year because I couldn't make the pieces of my life fit. Sometimes, besides crying, I was also really angry. Um, and it's amazing to me that I stayed in the game because at that point, I bought every book I could find that had some connection between women and Judaism, and I read them all, and some of them were so horrible, um, and so sexist and so limiting for women. And I was a doctoral student. I had a professional job at the University of Maryland. I couldn't make these parts of my life come together, but I stayed with it. And over time, slowly, slowly, I integrated uh, an authentic Jewish approach to women and Torah. And later on, when I read the book that I've spoken to you guys about, you all should read, it's called The Moon's Lost Light. That changed everything for me because I understood that some of what I was seeing was a residual effect of the sin that Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden, and it was not God's ideal plan. So I'm struggling with hair covering. I'm struggling with eating kosher. I'm struggling with the role that was laid out for me in my community about how women are supposed to serve God, which basically the way women were supposed to serve God, this is what I was taught, is that they should make a nice, comfortable home for their husbands and sons to learn Torah, and that's how they would be rewarded. Now, maybe that system worked for some women. Maybe it worked at some point in history, but I've always been, like all of you, kind of intellectually inclined. That was really not satisfying for me. Um, I had two children, both girls. That marriage also did not last. But in the course of that marriage, I had become fully observant and I was still learning. Very shortly after that marriage ended, after I was divorced, ritually divorced in a Jewish way, but not yet civilly divorced, I met the husband that some of you know, the one to whom I will be married for 29 years this December. And he was a rabbi in a local congregation. And so here's what happened. So now I'm kind of like in the Jewish community and I'm still going to classes and I'm still learning and stuff, but now I'm alone. Well, I have two children, but I'm a single mother. And I know that in my community, a woman with an advanced secular education with two children and two divorces, I was not exactly that marriageable and newly religious. Okay. So I started taking upon myself everything that I could to try to, because I'm still very young. I was in my 30s and I didn't want to be alone for the rest of my life. Um, So I did whatever I could. I activated whatever I could activate, and in some way, some miraculous way, I truly don't understand. My ex-husband moved out in January. On May 1st, I met my husband Ilan, and that December we were married. Um, on our honeymoon, we went to Israel. Now, I had never been to Israel before. I had friends who had been to Israel, and it was sort of like this. It wasn't very, Israel was not very emphasized in my own Torah education, whatever I had until that point. But on my first trip, and my husband, who was born in Israel, because his parents are Hungarian survivors of the Holocaust, they came to Israel right after the war. He was born here, as well as his older brother, and he left when he was very young. He was six, or he likes to say 6.5. And he had been back and forth to Israel dozens of times in his life. And every time he came back, he had to get an exemption from the army because he didn't live in Israel, but he was Israeli. And I thought it was the coolest thing that this guy has an Israeli passport. That was like amazing to me. Anyway, so he takes me to Israel on our honeymoon, my first trip. I know I have to go to the Kotel. I have to go to the Western Wall because this is what you do. And I was so scared, and I don't know why. I was so scared of that encounter that I kept postponing. He would say, "What about today? Let's go today." No, I'm not ready, blah, blah, blah. So we go eventually, it's towards the end of the trip, we go to the Kotel. And if you've ever been there, the Western Wall, the men and women are separated. So he goes to the men's side and I walk to the women's side and I start weeping, weeping, weeping. I am inconsolable. Nothing happened. I'm just at the Kotel. We had agreed like we'll meet in the plaza area behind the Western Wall, behind the Kotel at such and such a time. We go there, he meets me there. I'm still crying. And he's like, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong?" I have, we're married like 7 days or something at this point. I have no idea what's wrong. I don't know what I'm feeling. I just cannot stop crying. And the only thing I could think of to say was, I need a teacher, like a Torah teacher. Now, mind you, I had been observant for a number of, not that many years, but some years already. I wasn't like starting from nothing. But very early in our marriage, because I was now I'm a rabbi's wife, I started teaching beginners classes. I didn't know much, but I knew more than some people, and that's what I taught. The Lubavitcher Rebbe he used to say, if you know the alphabet, you should teach the alphabet. Like if that's all you know about Judaism are the Hebrew letters, that's what you should teach other people. And he said, and if all you know is Aleph, which is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, that's what you should teach. If all you know is Aleph, then you teach Aleph. So that's what I did. I started teaching like sort of baby Judaism classes for anybody. Now, obviously, when you're teaching, you're also studying. At this point, what was very popular, I don't even think it exists anymore. There was something called a women's tefillah group. Tefillah means prayer. And all over the country, at least in the US, Orthodox women were getting together on Shabbat morning to do the Shabbat morning service, which is very, very male driven, to do it ourselves. And one of the features of the service. Now, I didn't know enough to be able to lead the service, but one of the features was that somebody would give what's called a Devar Torah, like a word of Torah, a message from the Parsha. And for some reason, I still do not understand. The organizers, a few weeks into this women's tefillah group that I had been attending, asked me to give a Devar Torah. And I thought, I have been a Torah Jew for like 20 minutes. What, why are you asking me? What do I possibly have to contribute? Excuse me a second. But I had a rabbi for a husband. I had books. And so I put together, it wasn't like, a thesis. It was like a 5-minute message from the Parsha. And I loved it. I loved the study and I loved the presenting. At that point, I had a PhD in adult education. So it wasn't like such, I had never like really, it's one thing to teach beginners. It's another thing to teach something to Jews who know stuff. Um, at some point, after I finished my doctorate, I went back. There was an institution called Baltimore Hebrew University, and I went back and I got almost a second master's degree in Jewish history. The reason I didn't finish the degree is because there was one class that was like the Bible class that you're supposed to take that was taught by only one teacher, and his approach was a very academic approach. So there's Torah and there's academic Jewish studies. And in the academic Jewish studies world, their approach to Torah is very different. Many academics, it's like it's like the Bible is literature, if that means anything to you. So it takes God out of the picture, it takes mitzvot out of the picture, and it's just sort of like history. And I really thought, I don't really want to take this class. I don't want to like soil my soul by taking a class in the Bible from somebody who doesn't really believe any of this stuff. So I had that one class and my thesis. Now, at that point, I had already written a master's thesis and a doctorate dissertation. I had a topic. I knew how to do that. Um, but I didn't finish that class, so I never finished the degree. But I did, however, get a job as the director of adult education at the Center for Jewish Education in Baltimore, which I loved, loved, loved that job because it was my job to help bring Jewish education through the synagogue system to the Jews of Baltimore. And so I did that for about 4 years. Now we're up to September 11th, 2001. At this point, I had been to Israel maybe half a dozen times, and I thought, well, Israel's nice, but my life's in Baltimore. As a matter of fact, the month before, in August, I said to my husband, this is going to sound a little crazy, but I said, we're settled in Baltimore. This is obviously where we're going to live the rest of our lives. I want you to take me on a tour of all the Jewish cemeteries in Baltimore because I want to pick the place that we're going to be buried. And the amazing person he is, he complied. As a rabbi, he had officiated at funerals, at all of these funerals. There were maybe 8 of them. I don't remember how many, but he took me to all of them. And I picked the cemetery that looked like the way I thought a cemetery should look, very well established, big trees, very scenic and all that. In where most of my dead family in Florida is buried in the same grounds, there's there used to be, now there is, but there used to not be anything but footstones, or there was no like 3D headstones. There was just like a little plaque that you put in the ground. The lawns were very manicured, everything was very flat. And I felt like, well, this lacks character. So I wanted something different. So we pick out this Jewish cemetery. And just a few weeks later comes September 11th, 2001. And remember that I had just finished, more or less, most of a degree in Jewish history. And I suddenly, like, this was the second time that God spoke to me so clearly. The first time was about my husband. I knew we were going to end up together, even though there were times when it didn't look that way. But I understood with complete clarity that the US was just another host country for the Jewish people. And that thought had never occurred to me, but it came to me like a completely packaged idea that it was time to leave. And my family was not on board with this. So, so for 9 years, what I used to cry about this issue with women in Judaism. Now I'm crying because I can't go to Israel and I really want to live in Israel. And I really believe that's where we belong and blah, 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 blah. To my husband's credit, we came here every vacation, pretty much. My kids used to complain, we never go anywhere but Israel, blah, blah. It was magnetic for me to come here, in a way that I I don't I can't explain. But in 2003, we bought an apartment. We were still years away from ever living here, but it was during the Second Intifada, which this is the time when buses were blowing up in Israel, and most American tourists weren't coming anymore, and so housing prices were somewhat um, deflated. And I saw that based on our American income, we could buy a small apartment and make quarterly payments in dollars, and we could afford to do that. So that's what we did. We bought this apartment thinking, I don't know, there was a in a Jewish community in those years, there was a push to get people, because nobody was coming to Israel, to get people to buy products that were made in Israel. So the local kosher grocery store used to import a bunch of Israeli groceries. And we felt like, and also my husband's synagogue had this enormous fair where there were dozens of vendors that came in from Israel who had stores that sold stuff to tourists, and no tourists were visiting. So it was, there was a bookseller that we met. There were jewelry people, Judaica of all kinds, children's things, whatever, whatever. So um, at that time, I don't remember how it got started, but I was meeting with a bunch of women. We were really convinced that we were very close to Geula. We were very close at that point to the end of days. This is in the early 2000s. And so we started meeting to talk about it. We were this group of, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 of us. The only one I can remember, I remember most of us are here now. One of them is not here now, but is not here yet, but she does talk about it a lot. She has kids here. And so, so we were encouraging, and I was learning about this concept called Geula, which people were not really so much talking about that in the community, except for this in this small group of students. Now, we sent our kids to Zionist schools, and the custom in a Zionist school is that the year after high school, you go to Israel for a year. And there's hundreds of programs in Israel of all kinds, depending on what you want to do. And so our oldest daughter, when she was 18, she came to Israel for a year. And by that point, we already had our apartment. And what happens in most families is that the kid gets like the buzz and they say, oh, I want to move to Israel. I want to live in Israel. And their American parents talk them out of it. At least that was what was happening back then. This would be like 2009. She decided to come back for a second year of study and also to make Aliyah. So she's 19 years old. And I have been wanting to come to Israel for 9 years, like desperately wanting, doing everything I possibly can. There's something called Chug, is like it's like a group. I started a Chug Aliyah. I started an Aliyah support group. And one by one, all the people that would come to the meetings were making Aliyah, and I was still stuck in Baltimore. And I remember, because we came to Israel so often, in those days, Nefesh B'Nefesh, which is a big pro-Aliyah organization, would have these charter flights where hundreds of American Jews would make Aliyah on the same day. And if you were in Israel, you could sign up and you could go and welcome them. And invariably, when we were here, there was one of these landings, and there was somebody from Baltimore that we knew that had been part of my Chug Aliyah that that was on one of those flights, and we would go to greet them, which meant getting up like at 3:30 in the morning because we had to be at the airport by, I don't know, the crack, whatever, very, very early, which is very not like me. One of the few reasons why I was able to get up early in the morning. And I would cry first of all, I was very happy for them, but also I would say to my husband, when is it our turn? When does it get to be my turn? All these people that I help them with information and encouragement and so forth, and I'm still stuck in Baltimore. On one of these flights, this is in the summer of 2009, our oldest daughter, she's going to make Aliyah. So she came home for the summer and the flight was in September. And remember, we already had an apartment in Israel. She's 19 years old and she's going to go live 6,000 miles away. So what I did, what my husband and I arranged, is that I would fly to Israel the day before. I would meet her at the airport, spend a week with her, help her get a bank account, help her get um, her paperwork, her health fund, all that stuff. And then I would fly back to Baltimore. During this time when we were coming to Israel, my husband used to say to me, I see that this is hard for you to leave Israel. When it gets so hard you can't take it anymore, you have to tell me. So my daughter and I spend this week together. We get her all set up, and then she's going off to wherever she was going off to school. I don't remember what program she was going to. And I'm going back to Baltimore. And there's a lot of tears in this story, I realize as I'm telling you. So I'm crying, but they're like, you understand, they're every single time they're tears of longing. Like I want something spiritually that is blocked for me at that stage. Anyway, I'm crying. There's this it's called a Sherut. It's like a shared bus, and they go around, they pick up people who are going to the airport, and it's a 10-seater, and I'm in the most furthest out neighborhood. So they pick me up first. I sit all the way in the back. I don't want to see anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm just crying. So much so that the bus driver says to me in Hebrew, he says, "Yeh beseder, givert, yeh beseder," which means something like, "It'll be okay, lady. Whatever it is, it'll be okay." And I was just inconsolable. I get to the airport, I fly home. My husband picks me up at the train station and he drops me off at the house. And then he's a rabbi, he's a working rabbi at this point. He has to go do a life cycle event. And I walk into my daughter's room, which the last time I had been in that room, I was a few days before, 5 days, no, well, maybe 10 days before, whatever. She was sleeping and I kissed her goodbye before I went to the airport. I said, I'll see you in X number of days. Now the room is barren. All her clothes are gone. All her pictures are down off the wall. Her bed is stripped. There's nothing there because she has moved out because she just moved to Israel. And I sit down on her bed, and again, I'm crying, but not like, weep. Like I am wailing. And I had developed a big pile of tissues next to me, and I cannot move. And all I can think of is I, how much this hurts. I am stuck in Baltimore and I want to be in Israel where I felt like my neshama, my soul would expand. My husband comes home from this life cycle event. He hears me in the back of the house in this bedroom. He follows the sound of the tears and he sits down on the bed and he says, like, what's going on? Are you okay? And I have lost the power of speech. I cannot even say to him, I feel this, I feel that, blah, blah, blah. And he says, in what was one of his finest moments ever, he says, are you saying to me that you cannot take it anymore? And I realized instantly, as soon as he said that I was at that point. I cannot spend another 5 years in Baltimore. I just cannot. And so he shakes my hand and he says, okay, then. I just, hang on, I need a minute. It was very complicated. We had another daughter who was going into the ninth grade. He had a contract as a congregational rabbi. We had all of our family in America. And somehow we pulled it off and we came the next summer. I am now in my 50s. I left what was kind of something like a powerhouse career in higher education. My last position in higher education at the University of Maryland. I was an assistant dean. When I came to Israel, I could not do that kind of work anymore because my Hebrew language wasn't good enough. And also because the university system here was completely different. And so I got jobs. So I worked in technical writing, I worked in social media management, and eventually journalism, which is ironic because my very first college major that I declared was journalism. And I got a job writing stories for Israel 365, which some of you are probably very familiar with, that is run by Jews in Israel, but is directed towards Christian Zionists and supporters of it, non-Jewish supporters of Israel in the world. And I started getting messages from people who were reading the articles that was writing, saying, "We're coming to Israel. We want to meet you." I'm pretty sure that's how I met Valerie. Is that right, Valerie? Is that how we met? All right. While she figures out how to unmute herself, I'll continue. Okay. And so I started learning about these people who were doing Jewish things that I thought would just belong to the Jewish people. And they're studying Parsha and they're keeping the biblical feast, they called it, and they were eating biblically clean. And this was all like new for me. And I planned to write an article about it. That article turned into a book, which was 10 from the Nations. Alongside of that, in Israel, I discovered the meaning of the expression Shivim Panim LaTorah, which means something like the Torah has 70 faces. What does that mean? It means that there are lots of entry points into Torah learning, and what works for one soul won't necessarily work for another soul. But if you think that all of Torah is just like one straight thing, then I'm I hope you already know this, but this was new learning for me that there's lots of different ways to come in the Torah door, depending on what sings to your soul. In America, I didn't know that. In America, I thought there was one approach to Torah, and in Israel, I discovered that there were many, many more. And this is how I met one of my primary teachers, the woman who wrote the book, The Moon's Lost Light. I was in Israel maybe a year or two, and I saw that she was going to be giving a talk at Kever Rachel, which is where Rachel, like the foremother, Rachel is buried. And I went with a friend. We went to this talk, and she's been in Israel for like 55 years or something, but she was raised in America, so she spoke perfect English. And I asked her, "Have you ever written anything else? Because I loved your book. Your book changed my life, blah, blah, blah." And so she said, "Yes, but I don't know if it's for you," because um she's a lives in a different part of the Orthodox world than I do. Anyway, this was over 10 years ago, and we have been learning pretty much every week ever since. And she has introduced me to Hasidus, which I think I mentioned to you last week, is sort of like applied Kabbalah. So it's like the mystical side of Judaism. And she taught me this very interesting lesson. And I see that my time is almost over, so I'm gonna try to wrap this up quickly, but I have to tell you this lesson. So there's a teaching, you may have heard it, and I don't know if it applies to non-Jews, so forgive me for that, but that when Jewish babies are in utero, that an angel comes and teaches them the entirety of the Torah. And just before they're about to be born, the angel touches them right here under the nose, and that's where that indentation comes from, according to this legend, and they forget everything. But when they learn Torah later in life, there's a resonance because they've seen this before, they've heard this before. So I knew that, but my teacher said, not everybody gets the same Torah. Some people, I mean, they get the same Torah, but they don't get the same emphasis. Some people get what's called nigla, which is revealed Torah. That would be like the Talmud, the Jewish law, um, those kinds of things. And other people get the more mystical side. And she said that's why some souls resonate with one versus the other. And I thought that was really fascinating. I'm just going to bring you up to present time, and then I'll stop. I now have I have 3 study partners a week, so I study with her every week, and then I have 2 more peer study partners. One of my study partners, when the war first started, and this is how it connects to you guys, she had a son who was on reserve duty in Gaza and a son who was on reserve duty in Lebanon. And I said to her, "How are you functioning?" And she said, "Rivka, all I do besides work is I study and I teach Torah." And I was struggling at that point for how do I stay connected when the world is in flames? I mean, this is going back almost 2 years, but And that's when I decided to go back to teaching. And at that point, I had known some of you, and I reached out to some of you saying, I'm thinking of starting this class for non-Jewish women. Would you be interested? And we started out with a pretty small group, but that's how this happened. And so now, in addition to the 3 times a week that I study Torah with my learning partners, I also prepare and teach you guys. So my first great Jewish passion was clearly the women in Judaism and how that fits together. And when I made that, when I came to some kind of peace with that, then my second great Jewish passion, which was Israel, came forward. And I spent 9 years of obsession with everything related to Israel until I got here. And I am now in sort of, I don't know, my third or my fourth phase, I'm not sure how you would define it, of being fascinated by, obsessed by everything that has to do with redemption, everything that has to do with Mashiach. And part of that is you guys and the Torah awakening among non-Jews. So as I often say about my story, that Hashem, in terms of my role in being with people like you guys, is that Hashem just keeps opening doors and I just keep walking through them. I don't know where this is going exactly, but I hope that it was long. I hope that gives you some way more idea who I am, where I come from, how much I had to learn, and how there's a concept that the it is impossible for anybody to fully master Torah. We make a blessing in the morning that thanking God that we are immersing ourselves in Torah. Torah is it's like it's not like a library or a discipline that you study and you master and now you know everything there is to know about it. Torah is a all-encompassing huge system that that makes it a lifelong endeavor, which totally fits with my secular life where I believed in lifelong learning. In the 70s, there was in America, there was a postage stamp and it said, learning never ends. And I remember it was orange, and I used to have it as a poster in my room. So I very much believe in that philosophy that learning never ends, and that is certainly true about Torah. Um, Elizabeth has asked, how long did it take you to read and speak Hebrew? Okay. You can learn to read Hebrew fairly quickly. One can learn to read Hebrew. It's phonetic. And if you devote yourself in a matter of weeks, you can learn to read. Speaking is another story. When I had a little bit of background, but when I came to Israel, all Jews who moved to Israel as citizens get a what's called an ulpan, which is an intensive Hebrew speaking Hebrew class. So when we first got here, we arrived in July, and September 1 for 5 months, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. I went to Jerusalem and um, I studied Hebrew speaking. Am I fluent? Not by any stretch of the imagination. So if the answer to your question is, I don't know, I'll let you know when I get there. Um, but I also, I work in English. I live in a community where there's a lot of English speakers. And one time, maybe, I don't know, 6 months or a year after we lived in Israel, we went away for a Shabbat to this community where the only English speaker was Betty, who had these cabins that you could rent. And we went to synagogue that Friday night, and it was Hebrew, 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 Hebrew. And I said to my husband, if we had moved here, I would probably be fluent by now. But I think I'm, I'm not a newcomer in Torah anymore, but I will always be an immigrant. And that means whatever that means in every culture. When you're not native to the culture, there's always some places where you don't quite fit. But my grandchildren are born here, so that's pretty cool. Okay, that's what I came to share with you.
Amazing.
We are out of time, but if anybody wants to stay, um, you're I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, I'll shut the recording and we will go back to um, Parsha next week. Anybody want to say anything? If you do, just unmute yourself and speak.
Sorry,
Ah,
can I just ask Rivka,
yes, of course.
um, can you explain to me a bit more about the head covering and not wearing pants? Because that's all in my background. I was just wondering what the Jewish take on it is.
Okay, so let's talk about pants first.
Yes.
Um, there's a law that women are prohibited from dressing in men's clothes and men are
Mhm,
prohibited from dressing in women's clothes. So there's a difference of opinion about whether pants, especially culturally today, are
mhm,
considered men's garments.
mhm,
And so the reason why women who avoid wearing pants avoid wearing them is because of this law. However, there are two leniencies. One is if they are women's pants that were tailored for women. They were
mhm.
made for women. They're not men's
Yeah.
garments. And it's not, maybe there was a time when pants were associated exclusively with men, but we certainly don't live in that time now.
Yeah.
And so you will find people in some more liberal Orthodox communities who who do wear pants, even though they're fully Orthodox in every other way.
Mm,
Hair
okay.
covering is a way more complicated. It is basically some there's a law about how much hair you have to cover under what circumstances only after you're married. This law doesn't apply to single women. Um,
Um,
it's only after you're married, and it has something to do with sexual energy, and it's way bigger topic than I can get in right now. But what
okay.
I will say about both about hair covering and wearing pants is that for Orthodox women, they are both identifying markers. In other words, when you are out in the world and you
Mhm,
see a woman whose head is covered and who's wearing a skirt,
mhm,
if you know how to read the signs, that is
mhm.
usually an indication that she is connected to Torah in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Um, Now, does that mean that women who wear pants and don't cover their hair are not connected to Torah? It does not mean that. But just
Yeah.
like you probably have seen over time, there's many different styles of kippot, of the yarmulkes, the things what men wear on their heads. And they all, for insiders, they all signify something different. How big it is, what color it is, what fabric it's made out of, how you wear it, where on your head you wear it, blah, blah, blah. They all are clues to what part of the community you identify with. But I would say, aside from discussing the law, which is really nuanced and very complicated, that for women in in a Torah context, hair covering is a sign of her being a married woman,
Oh, I get it.
which is very
Okay.
different than the reason why men put something on their head. That has to do with their relationship with God.
Hmm. Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody? Yeah, Vicky, you want to say
Me,
something?
I have two things. First, what an amazing story. Thank you so much. I do want to ask you, have you experienced backlash for teaching non-Jewish women? And like, what does your community really feel about this endeavor that you've taken on so well and how much it's growing?
I'm going to go back to when I published my first book, which 10 from the Nations, which is Torah Awakening Among Non-Jews. That's when I got the biggest backlash, and it was very bad. Not
Mm,
universally, but there were certain players in my life who gave me a lot of grief, and I lost friendships, and I we left our
mm,
previous community in part um, because of the backlash for
mm,
that, which is fine because we ended up someplace even nicer and more understanding. In the community where I live now, I don't get very much backlash because there's a lot of people here who are involved in one way or another with interacting with the nations in Efrat.
mm,
And Shali knows that better than anybody because she's friends with probably pretty much all of them that are here. So in this community, before we moved to this community, I went to the chief rabbi and I said, here's who I am, here's the work that I do. I was given a very hard time in our previous community. I want to hear what you have to say. And he said, you are welcome here. You are welcome to do that here. So
wow.
there's some Jews who get it and some Jews who don't. So,
Well, tell him thank you.
yeah, sure.
And then I had a quick question on, I don't know if you want to do it while we're
Oh,
on air, or but we Elizabeth Seguin and I, we're getting ready to do this together for the 40 days of Teshuvah, and right before the feast. And a question that we had was when you put in our things that we're grateful for, are you supposed to every single day come up with new things, or are you transferring every single day? Because we were talking about, wow, by the time we get to the end, it's like thousands.
Right,
Okay,
right.
awesome.
What Vicky's talking about is a book that I published.
Uh,
Actually, it's called a Jewish Gratitude Journal, 100 Days of Thanking Hashem. And the
yeah.
idea is to turn your attention to the things that God does for you in a micro level. So that, and I'll give you an example. So we just got back from a couple of nights in this resort hotel thing around an hour from our house. And we went out to dinner last night. And when we came back, the road to the hotel was blocked by heavy machinery because they were resurfacing, and it's a little side street. They were resurfacing the road. And I thought, and I tried, I tried to go in another direction, and the GPS was saying just make a U-turn, and it did not give me an alternative. And I'm thinking like, okay, how are we going to get back? How are we going to get back? Because there's like no way to, they would not let us through because they're repaving the road. And so Hashem opened a way. And it ended up that if we turned right and turned right and turned right again, we would come in through the back entrance, and that worked beautifully. And we did get back into our room. And that would be an example of something that I would say, thank you, Hashem, for this very specific thing that happened to me today. And you will be astonished at when you start paying attention how many blessings God gives you that in the every day, all the time. In the beginning, you may be inclined to say, thank you for the big stuff, for my family, for my health, for my web, all that stuff. But then when you have to do it over and over again every day, and every day you have to add one, that's the idea, is that you get really good at starting looking and noticing at the granular level all of the ways that God is good to you. And I put in some prompts. So I would love to hear how that process is as you go on. Thank you for finding the book. Okay, I'm going to finish up. Thank you guys. I'll see you next week,
Thank
God
you
willing.
so
Thanks for
much,
listening.
Rivka. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.